Hello, mermaids, pirates. No, just joking. Just joking. Just joking. Um, hey, what's going on, good people? It's Gardner Douglas, your oyster ninja. I got a special guest, a little special guest tonight. I got Miss Kara, Muzia.
Muzia.
God dang it. I knew that. I knew that. It's crazy because I was practicing before. I was like, all right, let me hear her say it a couple times. I was listening to the podcast. That's how I got your intro. But cool. So yeah, she is the host of So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist. And you know, this is just hold on, a great podcast because different from what I do. Hers really deep dives. She has so much structure. It's just a great podcast, easy to listen to. Don't listen to the Oyster Ninja podcast. Don't do just this episode so you can find her podcast. No, just joking. Hey, what's going on?
How you doing? No, your podcast is fantastic. Everyone should just do all of the wonderful ocean-related podcasts, right?
Exactly. And honestly, it's enough room out here for all of us.
Yeah. So I host the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast, like you mentioned. And kind of how I got into it was, well, I am a marine biologist, start there. And I have done a lot of really fun things in my career. And I've gotten the question of, how do I do what you're doing? Or my niece wants to be a marine biologist. Like, how does she do that? And there really isn't a lot of great resources out there to answer this question. And I decided to be that resource. So it's not just like, this is how you become a marine biologist, because there's no one way to do it. And I think that people want to become a marine biologist or interested in the ocean because they love the ocean or they find it fascinating or terrifying, and that's fascinating in themselves, so they want to learn more. Right. So that's something I like to highlight on the show is like how amazing our ocean is and how much we rely on it, even if we don't live anywhere near the ocean. And there's always something that we can do to help the ocean, whether we're a marine biologist or we live in Nebraska and we're not anywhere near it, right? So it's really fun to talk to people. So we swap sea stories, we kind of dive into some science topics, and we get into what other marine biologists have done, or even not marine biologists, people that just have careers working with the ocean or ocean animals. And it's a lot of fun. We have a good time doing it. And your episode isn't released yet, but I'm excited for your episode to be launched into the world.
Cool. And that I think it'd just be fun, because I'm not a marine biologist, not even close. No type of backing or schooling on that stuff. But I still have the love for it. And like you said, you don't have to be or you don't have to be a marine biologist, or you don't have to go down this certain road. You can go down this avenue also, or you can look into shell recycling or whatever. But we're gonna get to the podcast more later. But I just want to talk about you, something different, right? Because you're a podcast host and it's never about you. It might be a story or something, but let's talk about you. Like, how was your upbringing, like as a little kid running around?
So I am super lucky. I grew up on the East Coast of Florida. So people talk about like they want to be a marine biologist from a kid. And I won't say I grew up wanting to be a marine biologist, but I think it was probably definitely brought into my brain from my environment. I spent a lot of time in the water, whether it was playing in the river or out in the ocean and the beach. I surfed. I like to scuba. I learned how to scuba dive. It was something I really wanted to do when I was 18. And, I just, anything in the water, I was all about it. So, I was really fostered. My parents, we never had a boat growing up, but we had friends that had boats, which honestly, it's even a better deal when your friends have boats. So we would go out with them all the time. We live several hours north of the Keys. So we would go down to the Keys fairly often, like at least once a year, and go snorkeling down there. So all of this really kind of fostered my love and my curiosity for the ocean. And then when it came down to what did I wanted to do for college, because not going to college wasn't a choice for me. Nothing sounded interesting except for marine science. Everything else was just like, meh, meh, meh. So I went for it, and here I am.
So what was high school studies like for you? Like, where were you interested, like type of courses were you interested in high school?
um, I mean, like I wouldn't say, I did take some marine science classes. So there was one class I really loved, two classes I really loved too. In my junior and senior year, I had environmental science and marine science, and they kind of were the same class. They just rolled it over into the different semesters. So we had, I think everywhere has different high school schedules, but for us, we had what's called block scheduling. So our classes were like 100 minutes long, and we had 4 of them a day. And then at the end of each semester, it would switch. So it was more similar to a college schedule than like elementary or middle school, where you kind of had the same classes and same teachers year round. So marine science and environmental science is something I was interested in doing then. I also took French. I took a ton of French in high school. By the end, I was like pretty dang good at it. Now I can like maybe get by, use it or lose it. But those are like my favorite classes. But high school, recently, I actually, they have the superlatives like most outgoing, like most likely to succeed.
Right,
I
right.
got the worst case of senioritis. So
Okay. All right. Easy enough.
that was me in high school. I spent a lot of time at the beach.
Nice. So how was college life and breaking into like marine science courses?
My parents were super strict. I had to have a 3.5 GPA in order to drive. And my school had a rule that if you had a 4.0 your junior and senior year, or I forget which years it was, but if you had a 4.0 straight A's, you didn't have to take your final exams. So I made sure I had A's because I didn't have to take final classes. And school wasn't super, like, it just wasn't that challenging for me for whatever reason. And I went to college without having to study much. And it was a very rude awakening. Because college, you just cannot breeze by in your classes. So for anybody that's like in high school now, knows a high schooler that's just like breezing by, they should learn some study skills while they can, because college was like really, really hard and a huge awakening. And it was, I kept coming back to like, okay, is this really what I want to do? Because this is a lot, right? Like marine science, it sounds really wonderful. And it sounds like you're just going to go out and play in the water all the time. And I think that's like primary reason why a lot of people get into it. It's why I got into it. But you are taking a ton of science classes, chemistry, and if you don't have study skills or a good basis for it, you're in for a world of hurt. So I definitely had to learn to study again. Calculus, we had to take calculus, which was like, oh my goodness. It's a whole nother language, and it's math. And decent at math, but it was algebra, and calculus just is
A little
a whole
different.
nother level. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Way different. So that was way different. And then, biology 1, all the general bios, chemistry. So like chemistry 1 and 2 were challenging, but then we got to organic chemistry. And I don't know why most people like cry when they hear orgochemistry, but I actually ended up loving it. I was one of the weirdos that ended up loving it. So, yeah, just a lot of science. And then once you get to like the really higher levels of biochemistry and molecular and cellular biology, I would say like the first 2 years of college are probably way harder than the last 2 years, even though you're taking higher level classes, just because I had such a big learning curve of how to study. And then being able to connect everything. It was like one epiphany after another my junior and senior year. And that was really fun.
So jumping into your actual job, like how was it looking for like I guess internships and jobs? Did you even know where to start?
Not really. So there's a nature center. Well, kind of. So my favorite job still was I was a camp counselor at a local environmental science school. It's part of the local school district, but I don't know. Kids go there every year, and it's K-7, and each year this field trip is different. So it's like the field trip that every child looks forward to, and it really fosters like all kids' love for the environment here, which is awesome. It's definitely partially where mine came from. And they also have a summer camp that pretty much every kid loves to go to, and I was no exception. But my favorite, when I was old enough, I was a camp counselor, and it was the best thing ever. So so after that, you age out. Once you're a senior in high school, they don't want you anymore. So after I came back from college, there's another nature center locally that I kind of looked at and got an internship for. And that's kind of where I knew to like start my internship process. And yeah.
So, what the listeners might not know is you did a bid. I don't know if I should say a bid, but you spent some time with Oyster Recovery. How did that even happen?
Yeah. So that's kind of a wild story. So I moved to Maryland and I got a job with the DNR actually up there. So I was living in Annapolis and I worked for Maryland Department of Natural Resources. And we were doing a pilot study for electronic reporting. There's watermen in the Chesapeake Bay. So these are crabbers, oystermen, any fishermen, they call themselves watermen. It's like their own rite of passage in the Chesapeake Bay. And we were doing a crab harvest reporting. So historically how it had worked was all crabbers had to report their catches, but it was done via paper. And by the time the paper got to the DNR, and then the DNR actually had somebody manually input it into a computer, it was like months down the line, and it was almost impossible to make any sort of good management decisions from it. So the idea was, well, we live in the 21st century, let's make this electronic. So I was brought on to help train smartphones or their home computer. They could call in for some of the older ones. That was more helpful. And a lot of the watermen are much older and they've been doing this a long time. So that was a lot of fun. But eventually the funding ran out for my position, and the DNR had partnered with Oyster Recovery Partnership to fund this project. And ORP was like, well, hey, we don't have necessarily the funding to keep you doing exactly that, but we have a position that's opening up over here. So you can kind of help a little bit with this crab reporting project, but also mostly you help us with our oyster stuff. So that's kind of how that happened. And my role over there pretty much got away from the crab reporting system that started to like run itself. But I was in charge of helping pick out sites. So I worked with the state, DNR, and also NOAA to help pick out sites. So the reason why Oyster Recovery Partnership and why are we putting oysters back in the Chesapeake Bay, back in like John Smith's day, right? Like 1800s, or even before that, 1700s, oysters were considered a navigational hazard in the Chesapeake Bay. So there was just heaps and mounds of them, and big ships were having a hard time getting through because they draw water, and oysters are just building these big bars. And now that is not the case at all there, even though there's massive efforts to try to make that happen again. Oysters are estimated at 1% of historic levels. So this is where push to restore them comes in. And oysters play, as you know, such an important ecological role, not only just providing habitat and structure to the bottom, which attracts all sorts of fish and bigger fish and just creates its own little ecosystem, but one adult oyster, so like 2 or 3 inches, can filter up to 50 gallons of water a day. So it's like an entire full bathtub. It can just go through the water. So it's pulling out all of everything from the water column and helping create like a healthier ecosystem for all the plants and animals that call the Chesapeake Bay home. So it was a really cool project. I was really excited to be a part of it. It was a lot of fun.
So when you were picking out locations, like what was important?
Their favorite substrate, they live on other oysters and just kind of build on each other, which is what you see when you're taking them apart and shucking them, right? You kind of see which ones have grown into each other and which ones haven't.
Right.
So we try to provide that. NOAA went out and mapped a lot of the bottom. And so we're looking for a hard bottom, because if you put oyster shell down, or sometimes we would put concrete rabble, or even like concrete pilings for them to settle on. If we put that into a bottom that was mostly muck, then it would just sink and it would the silt would take over and we wouldn't have any oysters there anymore. So we want a hard bottom, and we would go out. Noah went out and mapped a lot of it, but we would go out and ground truth it, which is literally putting a diver, me or some of my colleagues, in the water, and we run transects like throughout this site. And ground truthing, it sounds so scientific, but it's literally me like all in my dive gear with the communication link up to the boat, and I'm running a transect, which is just a line in the water, and like I think it was every yard was marked. And so every yard I was like calling up to the boat, okay, my finger is going in knuckle deep. Okay, my finger is not going in at all. So it's literally me just probing the bottom.
It sounds very scientific.
And that's kind of how we ground truth. Yeah. But I mean, we covered a lot of area, and then we would go back. We would have, they would either put substrate down if we needed it, so that's oyster shell, or like I said, concrete. And then we also work with Horn Point Hatchery, that's over in the eastern shore of Maryland, and they actually grew the oysters and had them settle on spat-on shell. So that's the baby oysters on the oyster shell. We would load them by like the tons, literally, onto big boats, and then take them out to our sites. They would get sprayed off the boats with like a fire hose, because it's literally a ton of oysters. And then we would come back like at set intervals to check on them, like all of that fun stuff, to just really get an idea of what it looked like.
Nice.
Yeah.
Great to have that oyster background.
Yeah.
So as a marine biologist now, what do you do?
Right now I talk about it. No, I have my podcast, and I've been helping out with my good friend Jessica Pate, works with the Marine Megafauna Foundation of the Americas. So I go out and we look for manta rays, which is a lot of fun.
Okay,
yeah.
That sounds like fun. So what made you want to start the daggone podcast? Because for me, I couldn't find anything I wanted to listen to, so I created what I wanted to listen to. Why did you want to start a podcast? It's hard work.
It is hard work. What I found that I love the most, besides just like playing on the water, was talking to people about it and getting people excited about it. And it was so much fun. Like with sea turtle work, we would have like sometimes baby sea turtles, and just like watching people's eyes get really big, really excited. And you can just like, you know, as you share what you're doing, you can just like see this light bulb go on, and like, oh, there's this whole world underneath the water that I'm looking at, right? It's a whole 3D world. And to just like bring that to life for people, even if it's just verbally and they don't see it, is like huge. It was like, it's very fulfilling for me. So that's kind of where the podcast stemmed from.
Nice. That's a great answer. So what's your favorite episode so far that you've recorded, and why, of course?
Well, yours isn't released yet, so we can't.
Good answer.
I want to say I have favorite parts of each of them. Like there's something about every episode that I love. A huge milestone for me, I had Sylvia Earle on the podcast very recently. She's episode number 60. And for anybody that doesn't know, she's a legend in the marine bio world, legend oceanographer. She's just done all of the things, has thousands of hours diving underwater. It literally has sea creatures named after her. Like, she's an amazing person and has done a lot of amazing things for the ocean and the ocean community. So that was a huge milestone for me to have her on the show, for sure. I don't know, I really like chatting with photographers. I like it when people get excited. I've had researchers from like Thailand on the show talking about sea slugs and digging in the muck. I feel like I learn something new every episode.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, and that's the truth, right? Like, and that's the funny thing about being a marine biologist or marine scientist. When you tell your friends and family that, or like you go out with them and they're like, oh, this is something ocean related, you must know what it is. And you're like, okay, well, the ocean's a very big place, and there are like literal millions of critters, not to mention systems. Like, I don't know everything. So I learned something every single episode, and that's the truth. I know, I know quite a bit. I've got a lot of research and I've talked to a lot of people, but when it comes to like, really digging into it, I learn something every episode, which is really fun. I think the biggest surprise for me and what I find the most rewarding is truly my audience. Like I like hearing from them, and like I get emails from them fairly often, and like just the feedback, and I didn't expect it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why I didn't expect it. It's kind of why I got into it, right? Like I like talking to people about it, but I really do. That's probably my favorite part and like the best part. And that was like what I learned most about myself is like, no, I really like interacting with the people.
Do you have any, or do you suggest the episode to listen to, like people's like when you tell someone you got a podcast?
You know, if you're a first time listener, honestly, my first episode is like a really great intro to the podcast. It's kind of why I did it. So it's like, what does it take to be a marine biologist? And if that's something like that piques your interest, then that's a great one to listen to. But we've talked about, like I said, sea slugs, nudibranchs, sharks. We've talked about flesh-eating bacteria. We've talked about dolphins and whales and corals and just all of the things. So there's an episode for you.
Nice.
I actually, one of my favorite episodes, and it's like really overlooked, but I like it because I had a question like, where does the mercury in the ocean come from? You always hear don't eat fish that are old or like really big because there's bioaccumulation. So they like, there's mercury in the ocean and it gets in the fish's tissues, and then small fish get eaten by the bigger fish, and then you're eating this bigger fish, and so you get this big dose of mercury. And I'm like, well, where does it actually come from?
Yeah.
And I couldn't find a good answer. So I asked a chemist from California, like a marine chemist from California, to be on the show just so I could get my answer. And that's probably one of my favorite episodes just because I was curious.
I'm gonna check that one out. And we can't even give the answer with, because we got to get people to go to find that episode and find out the answer for yourself. If you've been wondering, now you have an answer and you know where to get it from.
There you go. It's a several part answer.
Boom. Yeah, too easy. Yeah, I really appreciate you for coming on the platform. I appreciate you for sharing your platform, bringing me on your podcast. I hope everyone goes check out your podcast. So you want to be a marine biologist? Go
Awesome.
check it out. What platform? Where can we find you at on Instagram and all that, and the podcast? Where can we find it?
Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts. I've been posting some fun resources on my website. It's just marinebio.life.
Again, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. We're gonna talk more. I'm excited to hear the episode. Hope you're excited to hear this episode. And that's it. I'm out.